Hello, welcome guys. So today we are going to see an important concept in inventory management, which is an inventory turnover ratio. So before going to start with an inventory turnover ratio, let's first try to understand what do you mean by inventory turnover. So inventory turnover simply means how often a company is selling or replacing its stock of goods within a certain period of time or within certain time interval. Let's say we are going to calculate this inventory turnover for a particular month or particular year, or maybe a different time interval, or on the basis of quarter. Okay, so whatever time interval you are taking, you can perform this set of actions and you can derive your inventory turnover. So let's try to understand what do you mean by inventory turnover ratio. So inventory turnover ratio is a ratio of your cost of goods sold, which is your COGS, and your average inventory. So cost of goods sold is basically defines your revenue, and your average inventory levels defines your whatever inventory you are holding on an average for a given particular time interval. Now you will be thinking, what is the significance of this inventory turnover ratio and what it signifies. So let's try to understand this in a very simple way, and let's try to understand what should be your ideal inventory turnover ratio, and what is significance of lower inventory turnover ratio and higher inventory turnover ratio. So let's say you have a very high cost of goods sold, okay, and you have very low average inventory levels. Cost of goods sold defines the revenue, okay, from the sales. Average inventory level defines the amount of basically inventory is always associated with the cost. So your inventory increases, then your capital basically gets blocked, because ultimately inventory means and cost. Purpose of inventory is to sell and not to hold. So when you have higher inventory, the holding cost for that higher inventory will be always be higher. If you have lower inventory, the holding cost for that lower inventory will be low. So inventory is always associated with the cost. So average inventory should be very low as possible, and the average inventory you should be in such a way that you'll be always be able to service your customer demands or customer requirements. There should not be a stockouts due to unavailability of the product. Okay, so it should be in a such a way that it should not be too much higher or too much lower. It should be in an optimized way. Cost of goods sold is an purely an revenue for an organization, so it should be as high as possible. And from these two parameters, we are defining one common parameter, which is your inventory turnover ratio. It's a ratio of cost of goods sold and your average inventory. So let's say your cost of goods sold is higher, means your revenue is increased higher, and your average inventory is lower. So in this case, the ratio will be higher because the denominator is lower and your numerator is higher. So when your denominator is lower and your numerator is higher, so ratio will be higher. So higher ratio, what it signifies is you have a very good sales team, okay, they are achieving their targets, and second is your inventory management techniques are very efficient. And let's say talk in an opposite manner, your inventory turnover ratio is lower, means your cost of goods sold is your lower and you have higher average inventories. So in this case, you have very a poor sales team, or you can say that you have very higher inventory, or you have very high days of forward coverage. This is the average inventory. So this is what I have written in your next slides. When you have higher inventory level, so it simply says that uh, your company is selling the inventory very quickly, you have strong sales team and efficient inventory management techniques, and company doesn't hold onto a stock for too long basically, so because your sales is higher. And when you have lower inventory levels, a lower inventory turnover ratio, that means you have weaker sales team, you are holding too much inventory, and leading to potential overstock issues and higher holding cost. Basically you will be having high holding cost if you have higher inventory, and ultimately your inventory turnover ratio will be very low. So let's try to understand the same thing, which is your inventory turnover ratio, with the help of this formula, and we'll try to understand how we can derive the forward days of cover from this inventory turnover ratio in an Excel. So you can see my screen. In this screen, I have tried to calculate your inventory days of cover from your inventory turnover ratio. Okay, so let's try to understand how we have first calculated the inventory days of inventory turnover ratio, and this is purely calculated basis your values. Means we have not considered a quantity, sales quantity or opening inventory in terms of quantity. We have considered opening, closing inventory, average inventory, sales in terms of their cost, basis in terms of their values. Simply, suppose you have done an sale of $10,000 in a month. From this $10,000, the margin percentage is your 20%. So 80% will be your cost of goods sold. Okay, so this is basically 10,000 into 1 minus basically 100% minus 20%, which is your 80%. 80% of 10,000 is $8,000. So cost of goods sold is your $8,000 for a month. Let's say you have an opening inventory which cost around $8,000 and closing inventory which cost around $12,000. From this opening and closing, you have taken an average inventory which is around $10,000. Average inventory is basically an opening inventory plus closing inventory divided by 2. You take an average, simple average of two numbers. From this, you can derive your inventory turnover ratio, which is a ratio of your COGS and your average inventory. So 8,000 divided by. So in this case, you can see that COGS is higher, COGS is lower, and inventory is higher. So ratio will be less than 1. Okay, ratio will be less than 1 in this case. So 8,000 divided by 10,000, which will be around 0.8. What we have understood in significance of your lower inventory turnover ratio and higher inventory turnover ratio. So inventory days of cover, how you can derive from this inventory turnover ratio. So simply in terms of days you want to derive this, then you will simply do 30 divided by your inventory turnover ratio, because considering average 30 days in a 1 month, we have this all this calculation for 1 month. And simply in terms of month, if you want to derive, then it is 130 days is 1 month, so 1 divided by your inventory turnover ratio is 1.25 months. Okay, so approximately 1.25 months means 1.25 into, you will do simply 30, which is around 37.5 days. So this is in terms of days and this is in terms of month. Okay, so simple, you have 1.25 months of cover, which is around 37.5 days. So in this way, you can derive your inventory days of cover basis your inventory turnover ratio, and from this you can understand the importance of your opening inventory and closing inventory. Let's say you have an opening inventory of 2,000 and closing inventory of 3,000. So here your cost of goods sold is 8,000, but your average inventory is 2,500. So your inventory turnover ratio comes out to be 3.2. So since you have lower average inventory, your days of cover will be very less, which is 9 days color, 9.37.9 days cover approximately. In earlier case, it was 37 days of cover. So your average inventory is lower, your days of cover will reduce. Okay, but your inventory turnover ratio will increase. It simply means that you're holding an average inventory is lower, so your inventory turnover ratio is higher, and you're not blocking any capital for your inventory. Okay, so it's a good indicator. In this case, it's a poor indicator that days of cover is very less, but you're not having a higher holding cost in this case. So ideally, inventory turnover ratio should be very as high as possible. Okay, so that's all in this video tutorial. In our upcoming video tutorials, we are going to see much more tutorials on the days of cover and inventory management techniques. And from industry perspective, this is one of my experiences, and from this I'm trying to share my knowledge about inventory management and inventory management techniques. So thank you so much. If you like my tutorials, then you can subscribe my channel, and you can suggest me for which I will try to make content. Thank you so much, guys.